There's a quote I love, and it goes like this: "But down these mean streets a man must go who is not himself mean, who is neither tarnished nor afraid." And to me, that's Dunk from A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. But those words aren't George R.R. Martin's. They were written 80 years ago by Raymond Chandler about a hard-boiled detective. And yet, a man who is not himself mean, who is neither tarnished nor afraid, it's a man like Dunk. And it's at the heart of what makes this historical fantasy series work. So what if Dunk isn't a knight at heart? What if instead, in our modern terms, he's a private eye? Now, I know what you're thinking. At first glance, the hedge knight and the hard-boiled detective have nothing in common. One lives in a world of tournaments and ancient codes and men who still say their prayers before riding out to kill each other. The other lives in a world of neon signs and telephone wires and judges with bootleg liquor in their cellars. Different centuries, different clothes, different drinks. But strip the costume away and you've got the same man, an outsider, someone with no institution behind him and no guarantee that doing the right thing will be recognised or rewarded or even noticed. His only authority comes from the code he carries inside himself, which he refuses to compromise. He walks into the dark on behalf of people who can't or won't or don't know that they need him to, and he comes back changed, battered, maybe even a little beaten now and then, but not broken. From the tournament at Ashford Meadow to the mean streets of Los Angeles, the same man, 8 centuries or so apart. So that's our question: hedge knight or hard-boiled detective? Well, let's find out on Philosophical Book Club. Ah yes, it's a philosophical book club this time because we're talking about this. Ah well, and also this. Now, A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms is set 89 years before Game of Thrones, and spoiler alert for the first season here, as well as for the Dunk and Egg novellas, particularly The Sworn Sword. But in this version of Westeros, the dragons are dead, and the great houses are restless, and 2 people are riding towards a tournament, one on his noble steed, and another hiding in a cart full of lambs. The first is Sir Duncan the Tall, a hedge knight, which is to say a freelance knight with no lord and no guarantee that anybody at Ashford will actually believe he's a knight at all. He has armour that doesn't quite fit and a code of conduct that keeps getting him into trouble in a world that's kind of stopped caring about such things. His squire is a bald boy he calls Egg. Egg, we know, is secretly a Targaryen prince. So it's not quite the classic film noir setup of a woman walks into a detective's office. But stick with me, because we're going to establish what the knight-errant and the hard-boiled detective actually share, which is a lot. The Dunk and Egg novellas, we'll see, are basically detective novels, with Dunk blundering into one plot or conspiracy amongst the powerful after another. And then we'll look at where they diverge too, because the gap turns out to be the most interesting thing sometimes. We're going to follow Dunk through a plot that works like a proper noir investigation as well, and we're going to end somewhere that has something to say about why we keep telling this story or enjoying this story, and what we need these kind of stories to do for us. Because we do keep needing these kinds of stories. At their heart, they are about a man who persists in doing good, in living by his code, in a world that's gone bad. Maybe there's some modern relevance there? Well, I'll leave that case up to you. But first, what kind of man is Dunk? And what kind of man is the hard-boiled detective like Philip Marlowe? Well, they accidentally annoy a lot of people and get beaten up a lot.
What do you think, Mabel?
But here is what Chandler says his detective must be. He is a relatively poor man, or he would not be a detective at all. He is a common man, or he could not go among the common people. He takes no man's money dishonestly, and no man's insolence without a due and dispassionate revenge. He is a lonely man. He has a disgust for sham and a contempt for pettiness. Now put that man on a horse and give him a sword instead of a gun. Take away the neon and give him torchlight. That's Dunk. Both figures exist because the institutions have failed to deliver what they promised. Chandler's Los Angeles is full of corrupt judges, bought cops, and respectable men who made their fortunes from rackets like brothels. Meanwhile, the tournament at Ashford is full of lords performing honour as theatre, while the small folk eat whatever falls from their tables. In both worlds, the official structures can't be trusted to produce justice. So the story reaches for a man who carries that justice inside of him, who doesn't need the institution because the institution has already forfeited its authority. This is, I think, what Chandler means when he says that Marlowe is a man of honour by instinct, by inevitability, without thought of it, and certainly without saying it, as he writes. Neither Dunk nor Marlowe talk about their code. They just live it. And they pay for it. It's also worth noting what Chandler was kind of pushing back against. Dashiell Hammett's detective, Sam Spade, and Hammett is another famous detective fiction writer, is a pretty professional operator. He's competent, he's pragmatic, he's not particularly interested in justice as such. Chandler looked at that and said, that's not enough. Marlowe isn't just good at his job, he's good at catching just the right thread at the most dangerous moment. And his code isn't professional conduct, it's honour. The only thing that he often has left. It's a moral performance sustained in a world that keeps trying to bribe him out of it. And the archetype goes back further than either of them. Kurosawa's samurai in Yojimbo, for example, no lord, no clan, a sword and a code, is the same figure that was written about in feudal Japan. So is the wandering gunslinger who rides into the corrupt town and changes one small corner of it and then rides out again, having changed nothing larger. Same man, different costume, different setting, different century, but the same code. But there is a slight difference between Dunk and Marlowe, between the romantic and the noir, because a knightly romance, like the Dunk and Egg novellas, still believes at some level that that code is socially legible. There are still oaths and ceremonies and heraldry. When a true knight acts with honour, the world can, in principle, recognise it. There's a particularly famous story of knightly honour called Sir Gawain and the Green Knight that George R.R. Martin is clearly riffing off and reacting to. And in it, Sir Gawain's entire story turns on the visibility of that honour. It's a knight whose public honour and private conduct are tested against each other, with the court watching. Because in a romance, the court is kind of always watching. The chivalric system here is corrupt, and it is class-bound, and it is often hypocritical, but it still pretends to value the thing that it pretends to embody. The code still has a public face. Whereas in noir, we see this pretense abandoned entirely. The detective Philip Marlowe operates in a world that doesn't recognise his code, that doesn't reward it, and that actively punishes it. Everybody thinks he's a fool for doing the right thing, and that he should just take the money. It's been so corrupt for so long that no one is even pretending anymore, not even the heroines, which means that the institutions here aren't just corrupt, but that they're openly indifferent to the values that they were supposedly built to protect. Like almost every cop in a Chandler story is on the make, and their bosses too, for example. The code of honour that Dunk embodied and that Marlowe keeps has become entirely private. The hard-boiled detective carries it alone in a city that will never recognise it. And this, to me, is what makes Dunk so interesting. He's a romantic hero. He believes in knighthood. He was formed by it, and it's the language he uses to understand himself. But he's living in a world that's increasingly becoming noir. The tournament at Ashford looks like a chivalric romance on the surface, but underneath it, the lord who's running the show is trying to make a little of that money he's overspent on it by bribing Dunk.
But we're a challenger to come forth, and on horse, Sir Andrew, against all odds. The lucky few who backed such an unlikely winner would find their pockets full. A tidy sum for a young edge knight who presently calls an elder tree home.
Okay, that, to be fair, is the TV series rather than the novellas, but it is a good addition. It's also a classic noir move. No one seems to live by the code anymore. And speaking of codes, if you're enjoying this, please like, hype and subscribe. That's the YouTuber's code. Then there's the false friend trope of noir, the support you think you can count on until it turns out that they were playing you the entire time.
I fight with Prince Arian and the accusers.
You told Sir Duncan to rely on you.
Well, our prince would not have made me a lord elsewise, but for it thwarted Sir Duncan.
This one's great because, spoiler alert for Robert Altman's 1973 classic based on Chandler, The Long Goodbye, but there's a similar confrontation in that too.
How you doing, Terry?
Marlowe? I guess if anybody's gonna track me down, it would be you.
So you murdered your wife, huh, Terry?
She didn't give me any choice.
You didn't have much choice, huh? So you used me.
The hell, that's what friends are for. I was in a jam. Come on, have a drink. The hell, nobody cares.
Yeah. Nobody cares but me.
Well, that's you, Marlowe. You'll never learn. You're a born loser.
Yeah, I even lost my cat.
The Westeros revealed at Ashford Meadow is slowly turning into Chandler's LA, and we'll see this hard, realist, duplicitous world come to fruition in the Game of Thrones books and series, where behind the scenes, everybody seems to be playing everyone else. Because underneath, Westeros runs on the same logic as Chandler's mean streets. It's money, it's power, it's impunity, and it's the performance of legitimacy by people who stopped believing in it quite a long time ago. By those standards, Dunk is a romantic figure from another time, but so is Philip Marlowe, the detective Dunk might have been if he landed on the hard streets of 1920s America. And that gap between the code they believe in and the world in which they actually inhabit is where all the drama lives. The series gives us glimpses of this. It has moments where Dunk is an outsider in halls he shouldn't be in and he's overhearing what powerful people assume he can't understand. Overhearing things and slowly putting things together, even if it's with the help of the wily egg in Dunk's case. That's classic noir. But Martin really leans into the figure of the knight as a hard-boiled detective in the second novella, because the Sworn Sword gives us a proper noir plot. Dunk and Egg have taken service with Sir Eustace Osgrey, an old knight of declining fortunes who's now basically a lord with a single tower and a handful of servants. He's basically a man who speaks about his family's history the way old men do when the history is all that they have left. There's a water dispute in it too, which now I think about it is a touch Chinatown as well, with Lady Rohan Weber, the Red Widow they call her. The stream that feeds Eustace's land has been dammed upstream, and Dunk's job, or at least, again, this is another classic noir trope, the one that he takes upon himself because he can't let enough alone, is to find out what happened and set it right. And what follows is structurally a Raymond Chandler plot. The client hires him. Spoiler alert, but the client has lied. And the truth ends up being uglier and more complicated than the story he was paid to confirm. So Dunk follows the physical evidence in a classic Sherlock Holmes style. He's literally following the riverbed upstream to find out where it's been diverted. He questions the witnesses who have given him conflicting accounts. He rides into enemy territory under a pretext, watching and listening for the things people aren't quite saying. And he gradually discovers that Eustace's account of the events is partial and pretty self-serving. The man he's sworn to serve is not straightforwardly the good guy. The woman he rode in to oppose is not straightforwardly the villain either. And Chandler knew this move really well. In The Big Sleep, by the time Philip Marlowe understands what's actually happening, he's discovered that his client's family is considerably more compromised than they presented themselves, and that the crime that he was hired to prevent is tangled up with crimes nobody hired him to investigate at all. The detective's job in these isn't just to find the wrongdoer, it's to find the truth underneath the story the client is paying him to confirm. And then there are the odious henchmen, of course. There always are. There are always odious henchmen in Chandler, in Martin, and in every iteration of this story. In Season 2 of The Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, it could be this guy.
Where's the necklace? Tell me and I'll stop
You
it.
shouldn't have done that. You shouldn't have hit me.
These characters are always that corruption made flesh, lots of flesh. And Dunk deals with them the way Marlowe would, not by dismantling the system that produced them, that's a little beyond their power, but by getting through with their code intact, often tackling them man to man and beating them with smarts when they're the underdog. And there's another classic trope of noir that Martin adopts too. The ending doesn't fix anything really. The water dispute resolves itself pragmatically rather than justly. The great crimes go unpunished, or they're not quite forgotten but let lie. Dunk can't arrest a lord, after all. His business, like Marlowe's, is to walk through the situation, to see it clearly, to act with integrity, and to leave. A tiny act of justice, in lieu of solving the great injustices of the cosmos. Maybe it will make a difference, maybe it won't. And critically for noir, in contrast to something like Arthur Conan Doyle or Agatha Christie or other classic crime writers, there is no parlour scene. Everybody already knows the crime and who did it. The hard-boiled detective and the hedge knight are often the last to cotton on to what's going on. The locals always know who the villains are and what they've done, even if only vaguely, which is the real difference between, I think, these kind of stories and a puzzle mystery or a locked room mystery or something like Knives Out, because the crime isn't hidden. It's systemic. And what's at stake isn't revelation, it's whether one man, knowing what he knows now, will act with integrity anyway. The detective's role isn't to expose the truth always, it's to witness it and then to make a choice. Back in Ashford, the same logic applies. What looks like chivalric ceremony is already underneath it a miniature city of respectable masks. The rich perform honour because they can afford to. Dunk practices it because he can't afford not to, because without it, he's just a large man with a dubious claim to a knighthood that nobody can verify. The fix is in from the start. The powerful are protected. And our hedge knight, at the end, after all the blows and the beatings, has finally figured it out. Chandler wrote that the detective story is, quote, this man's adventure in search of a hidden truth. Martin has been writing exactly that for 30 years without calling it detective fiction. So why does this archetype persist? The knight-errant has been around since the 12th century. The hard-boiled detective arrived in the 1920s and hasn't left. Dunk debuted in 1998 and is now an HBO series. In between, you have the samurai, the gunslinger, or the spy who keeps one foot outside the institution he serves. The figure keeps being reinvented in new genres, new settings, new eras, and always the same conditions apply. Which is, and I'll say it plainly, when power feels unaccountable. When the official version of events and the actual version have drifted too far apart to ignore, when it starts to feel like those in charge are lying to us and everybody knows and everybody shrugs except for the one lone figure. And part of what genre fiction does, what it's always done really, is to give us a space to rehearse our own conduct under that kind of pressure. We read and we watch these stories not to escape the world, but to practice moving through it. The knight-errant, the detective, the samurai, they're all figures in a moral laboratory. We watch them make choices under conditions that strip away every excuse, every institutional support, every social guarantee, and we ask ourselves, what would we do? What could we do? What would we owe there? Would we live up to our codes? The easy answer to why does this kind of story persist would be escapism. You know, we want to believe that there's a good man out there navigating a world we find overwhelming and keeping his soul while the rest of the world haggles over the price of theirs. And that's not wrong exactly, but it isn't quite the whole story. Because this, the myth of the one good person, is a bit of a fantasy of moral purity that leaves the systems untouched. Marlowe doesn't reform Los Angeles. Dunk doesn't dismantle the Targaryen power structure. The corruption persists. The powerful stay powerful, and the lone figure of integrity can become a way of feeling good about individual conduct, while collective structures quietly rot and the corruption continues. One good man navigates the corruption, sure, but nobody dismantles it. And that is a serious objection to both the romance and to noir that points out something a little inconvenient, a bit of escapism and cope rather than coming to terms. But I don't think that's exactly what these stories are offering. They're not meant to offer a solution. They're offering a demonstration, what philosophers would call a mode of being. Dunk doesn't show us how to fix a corrupt world. Instead, he shows us that a person can move through a corrupt world without becoming corrupt themselves, without bending the knee to those who would bribe us or call us fools. So here's the philosophical insight that I think these stories show, at least to me, that the choice of how to conduct ourselves is always ours. Even when everything else has been taken away, even when the institution has failed, and even when the code will cost us more than it gives us. Sure, it's not a political program or a set of policies or a change, but it's not nothing either. In a world that works very hard to convince us that everyone has their price, a figure who simply declines to be bought shows us something invaluable, like Marlowe and Dunk. Chandler also gets at something much deeper than escapism when he writes that in everything that can be called art, there is a quality of redemption. Not redemption in the sense that things get better, but redemption in the sense that even the darkest, most thoroughly corrupt world contains a figure who demonstrates that goodness is still possible, that you can walk through the mean streets and come out the other side. Not victorious, perhaps, not unscathed, but uncompromised. What all these figures share is that they don't lie to us. They don't promise that goodness will triumph or that justice will be done. They don't promise that the arc of anything, history or the universe or whatever, bends towards anything in particular. As we saw in the trial of the seven, it's all chance and accident, really. These stories do promise something more modest, though, and much more true, that a person can choose their own path. That in a world designed to reduce everyone to a function or a transaction or a price, it is still possible to be fully, stubbornly, and inconveniently human. And there's a little thing that I love too, that the Dunk and Egg stories show that Chandler's novels can't. They show the code being transmitted. Because Philip Marlowe in the books has no mentor and no student. He emerges fully formed onto the mean streets, and when the novel ends, he's still alone. His code is his own. It's inherited from somewhere, but the story doesn't specify where, and it's carried pretty privately. And it dies with him when the last page turns. The hard-boiled tradition is, in this sense, a tradition of solitude. The good man walks alone, and when he's gone, he's gone. But Dunk's code has a name, and has come from somewhere important. Sir Arlen of Pennytree, a dead man who may or may not have formally knighted him, and who taught Dunk not by lectures, but by example. By the way he moved through the world. I talked about this in the Honour video. By the things he refused to do when it would have been easy for him to do them. And Dunk doesn't talk about Arlen that often really, but Arlen is present in everything Dunk does. He is the source of the stream. And Dunk, in turn, is teaching Egg. It's not deliberately or with any sense that he's passing something down. That's a bit too grand for Dunk, but by just being what he is, day after day, in the small decisions and in the large one. So Egg watches. Egg is always watching. A boy who will one day be king, learning what a good man looks like from a hedge knight who isn't even sure he's a real knight. When Dunk is at his lowest, beaten and humiliated, the code having again cost him more than it'll ever give him, Egg doesn't offer philosophy. He doesn't explain why it's worth it or promise that it'll get better or tell Dunk that history will vindicate him. He offers him something simpler and more useful. He just tells him to get up. And Dunk gets up. Dunk shows him that it is possible to be a good man and to keep going. So Dunk doesn't solve the tournament and come out the hero. He actually doesn't end up getting to fight in the tournament itself at all, but a trial instead, which offers no reward at the end. He doesn't bring down the Targaryens or drain the corruption out of Westeros. He's not really responsible for ultimately solving the problem of the stream either, and he's really more of an observer to the forces playing out in the third novella too. But he does what Marlowe does. He walks through it. He sees it for what it is, and he comes out the other side with his code intact. In a world that works very hard to convince you that everybody has their price, as I've said, that every code is just performance or virtue signalling, and that cynicism is the only honest position, and I've gone into that too. This is a man who simply keeps going, who keeps choosing and keeps true to what he is. Well, that's a powerful kind of argument in and of itself. It's not a loud argument, might not be a winning one all of the time, but it is a persistent one. I think it's a necessary one. I want to close with Chandler's words, because whether we're reading about Dunk and Egg or Marlowe or Gandalf or any of these good figures walking a hard path, I hear this. The story is this man's adventure in search of a hidden truth, and it would be no adventure if it did not happen to a man fit for adventure. He has a range of awareness that startles you, but it belongs to him by right, because it belongs to the world he lives in. If there were enough like him, the world would be a safe place to live in, without becoming too dull to be worth living in. Such is my faith. And such is mine. But that's it for this episode of Philosophical Book Club. If you're interested in hearing more, then check out our video on the trial of the seven, or have a look at what happens when the Targaryens lost their nukes. But until next time, be wise and be kind, and remember,
I do not want a victory that I have not earned.